Good morning. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us today. To open our conference, I am delighted to introduce the CEO of La Caixa Foundation, Mr. Antonio Vila.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is an honor and a privilege for me, on behalf of La Caixa Foundation, to opening this forum Philea, which is, without doubt, the leading philanthropic organization in Europe. I hope and I wish that your stay in this forum is highly rewarding for a professional point of view, and in addition, enjoyable, why not, in terms of leisure activities you will be able to take part in. La Caixa Foundation has been a member of the European Foundation Center since 2010. We have also been a member of the Spanish and Catalan Foundation Associations for more than 30 years. Over the years, we have benefited from the services provided by these associations, and it is now our responsibility to contribute to them with our time and effort, and we are fully committed to them. Allow me to outline the origins of our foundation, the nature of our philanthropic work, and how we developed our mission. Our beginning go back to the former Caixa de Pensiones para la Vejez, founded in Barcelona in 1904. I refer Pensiones para la Vejez, or old age pension, to highlight its social vocation. Later, savings were also included in the portfolio of this entity, and over the years it became La Caixa, the trademark that today gives its name to our foundation. That saving bank is today CaixaBank, the leading bank in Spain, in which the foundation holds the 30% of its capital. The following slides show our foundation areas of activity and the shareholding included in Criteria. Criteria is the holding company which provides the foundation with the financial resources it needs to carry out its philanthropic mission. CaixaBank is the most significant shareholding in Criteria's portfolio. In terms of budget, our programs and calls for social proposals account for 60% of the budget, with culture, science, education, and biomedical research accounting for the remaining 40%. Apart from these specific areas, the international area focuses in activity transversally on global health, on job creation and education programs among the most vulnerable people in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America. This year, we are going to celebrate the 25th anniversary of these international collaboration programs. When we implement those programs, we combine different approaches to increase our impact. Essentially, we integrate all on programs into our strategy, which designed and supervised directly by our teams, and also we provide solutions with grants through open and competitive calls. More than 5,000 social organizations from all over Spain compete for grants for their projects, which have a maximum of 50,000 euros per project. I would like to highlight that foundation offers methodology and economic support, but without the work of the hundreds of social entities that make up our network, we wouldn't be able to reach the beneficiaries. For us, to be close to these entities all over Spain is really important. Now, I would like to briefly describe our main social programs. Child poverty, through the Caixa Pro Infancia program, we support families in social and education development for over 60,000 children per year, aged 3 to 18. Employment was the second one. We assist people with limited access to the labor market to find employment, which accounts for more than 50,000 new labor contracts a year in collaboration with 500 local NGOs and social entities and 15,000 companies. The third one is integral care for people with advanced diseases. We provide psychological and spiritual support for people at the end of their lives and for their close relatives. 45 psychosocial care teams carry out this work in more than 130 hospitals and also homes. The last program, the elderly, is the longest running one at La Caixa. Our main activity here is the promotion of activity aging, covering 3 core areas of action. Introduction to the technology. More than 90% of our centers for elderly have a computer room. Promotion and active role of these people, and workshops that help to solve some problems affecting them. The program has 61 centers belonging to La Caixa in Catalonia and over 500 centers throughout Spain that we share with the city halls. Given the humanitarian crisis caused by the conflict in Ukraine, La Caixa Foundation, in collaboration with the Spanish government, has launched a service to connect host families with refugees in 4 cities, Madrid, Barcelona, Murcia, and Malaga. To accomplish the whole process of validating, attending to, and monitoring the families within the project, we have used our network of social entities that usually develop our programs. So far, we have approved, until today, 424 Spanish families willing to take in Ukrainians. So far, social programs, the rest of our activities include culture, science, education, research, and health. Caixa Forum is the major network of cultural centers in 8 of Spanish principal cities. We will be open a new center at the end of this month in the new city, Valencia, at the end of June. Cosmocaixa is the first science museum in Spain and one of the most important in Europe. Just for example, 1,500 school children visit the Cosmocaixa Center every day. Fellowship programs have promoted excellence in education for more than 5,000 graduates at the world's best universities and research centers. Last year, we launched a new degree fellowships directed at excellent students with limited financial resources. Educaixa provides an educational activities to improve the learning opportunities for children aged 6 to 18. In the research and health area, we issue a call for outstanding scientific research in different biomedical disciplines, such as oncology, neuroscience, infectious and cardiovascular diseases. We provide grants for the best projects. To end my explanation on our programs, I would like to point out the project that we have created recently. Caixa Research Institute is a new biomedical and translational center set up to become a top-class research center in the study of immunology. Allow me to finish by congratulating all of you for your commitment to the philanthropy. We fully believe that philanthropy is a powerful tool. I'm sure all of us try to quantify the impact of our actions in society, and it is not an easy task. However, it is clear that without the philanthropy we engage in, the world would be far worse than it is. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we all agree indeed that the world is a better place with philanthropy, and it's such a pleasure to have so many of you united here with us today in the beautiful city of Barcelona. And I'd like to start by expressing my sincere and profound gratitude to all of those who contributed to making this happen. Members of the Program and Host Committee led by La Caixa, and I'd like to thank you, Mr. Vela, thank you, Angel, as the president of Philea, and also thank Nacho for taking on the challenge as chair of the program committee. of organizing a conference in a record time. We made it, Nacho, and we're very happy to be here. Let me also thank my team. Which has worked very hard and long hours to get us to where we are today. And the conference today is the first Philea Forum. It is the first Philea Forum 32 years after the first EFC conference took place in my home country in Bruges. And for those who were with us yesterday evening, we have seen a tower of people climbing on one another. And I think that it is quite clear that if Philea is where it is today, is that it's because of the shoulders we have been able to build it on, the shoulders of EFC and Daphne. So the first Philea Forum, and in all modesty, I think we're off to a good start. Thanks to the hard work of many of you, we have a 3-day exciting programs, including 17 workshops, 28 site visits, 2 plenary meetings, 3 networking dinners, 7 satellite events, 1 dedicated Philea coupon by the Casa Foundation, and a couple of surprises which I will refrain myself from revealing just now. And I'm so honored that 736 of you decided to join us for this Philea conference. In organizing this Philea conference, we wanted to make sure that it was accessible for all, and that is why we have invested extra efforts to making sure that it was also accessible for people with disability. And we've put special measures in place, again, with the support of ONCE. And as we celebrate the European Year of Youth, I'm also very happy that we have 20 young people with us today, 20 young people between the age of 17 and 30, who will share their voices and help us conceive a greener, more inclusive and better future. And let us be clear, as we slowly recover from the pandemic and against the backdrop of a war in Ukraine, with the existential clock ticking for humanity due to climate change, the title of our event, The Time Is Now, is by no means an exaggeration. We need all of us, Philanthropy United, to contribute to making that greener, more inclusive and better future a reality for all. And you have agreed with that. In a pre-conference survey that we organized, 500 delegates emphasized the need for addressing the interconnectedness of the issues that we are facing, in particular climate and justice. You have shared your thoughts on the need for more continuation around new ways of funding that include participatory grant making, flexible and unrestricted funding, and green investments. And last but not least, you have also emphasized the need for continued multi-stakeholder partnerships to address the many challenges that we face today. So we have a lot to discuss. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our 4 speakers for this plenary meeting this morning. Joe Elborn. Joe is the Secretary General of the European Youth Forum, which represents 40 million young people in Europe. Joe, please join us on stage. Help me also welcome Michael O'Flaherty, the Director of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency. Leonardo Simao, the High Representative for Africa for the European and Developing Country Clinical Trials Partnership. And Laurence Toubiana, the CEO of the European Climate Foundation and architect of the Paris Agreement. So, a very warm welcome to all of you. It is such a pleasure to moderate a panel with such exceptional speakers. I'm really delighted that you agreed to join us today. And the focus for our conference is really centered around 3 key topics: One Planet, One Health, United in Diversity, and Culture and Creativity. And what we wanted to emphasize with those 4 or 3 themes was very much the intersectionality of issues. And the need for comprehensive approaches in responding to the various crises that we're facing today. And I wanted to start maybe by turning to you, Laurence, because you just came back from Davos. And in some of the interviews that you gave from there, you emphasized, of course, the need for urgent action, but you also spoke of how you see that climate is indeed being seen as a more mainstream topic across the different exchanges that you've had also there in Davos. And I wanted to have your thoughts on, are we understanding the importance?
Yes, it was striking how much climate was dominating the conversation. And it's good because, as we know, this year, not only government, but companies and investors has to be serious about their climate pledge. And so I think it was a good moment where, where we see who was very serious about that. And we have in particular meetings with, it was an interesting forum, a small one, with Philanthropy and Kristalina Georgieva from IMF and Christine Lagarde and Timmermans and von der Leyen, meaning governments and philanthropy talking together. And it was interesting that the bond between them, between these two constituencies, was about how we partner, as you said earlier, Delphine, to tackle a global public good like protecting climate. The other element is you feel that the discussion on globalization is very uneasy now, and it was striking to see in Davos that, it was not so international as normal. There was, of course, very few Chinese, only one. The one was a climate envoy, which makes sense. It was a sort of strong signal from the Chinese government that even if most doors are closed, together with John Kerry, they were all together there to say climate is very important. So that was another signal. But then I think it's a moment where probably the business sector investors are looking at a very somber situation. Of course, the Russian war first, but always many conflicts all over the world and instability and the food crisis and inflation. So anxiety is there, and climate seems to be the bond. And just to finish there, because I don't want to take too much time, when we at ECF did a number of polls across the region of Europe and many other countries, you see that environment and climate in very fragmented society is somehow environment and climate, the bond that can unify again people. Of course, security is a very important element, and now, of course, trying to afford for food and electricity and heating. But the environment is something that bond groups together, where there is so much politicization and antagonism in society and fragmentation, that this can be a healing factor to act together, not to be afraid of climate change, but to act together.
Thank you. And on that point of acting together and your point on globalization, maybe I'd like to turn to you, Leonardo, and talk a bit about how during the pandemic we've all become much more clever about the fact that if we want everyone to be safe, that requires a global approach, among others, to those problems. Yet 2 years after the pandemic broke, we see that in the Democratic Republic of Congo, 0.6% of the population is vaccinated. In Yemen, 1.4% of the population, and in most European countries, 80% of the population is vaccinated. So what is your take on how philanthropy can respond to this?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank you very much for inviting me to this very important meeting. And also congratulating you for bringing together all the European foundations on philanthropy under the same roof. It's not an easy task. So congratulations for that. And going to your specific question, the main challenge we have, the world is faced with, is to make sure that every person at risk is vaccinated. Only when we reach that stage, the pandemic will be dominated. Unfortunately, the experience is showing that this is not happening, and this is far from happening. During the initial phase of the pandemic, we saw countries looking onwards. All of them, they look at their own citizens, and they just forget the commitments, the global commitment they have. So it was a very painful stage of this process. But on the other hand, the good thing was that dialogue was still there. And the countries which were being left behind, they were able to voice their concerns and convince the more affluent countries that if their countries are left behind, they will continue to be a source of danger for everyone. And even if you take into account that 80% of the populations in the north are vaccinated, but the fact that we are leaving others behind, That means that the possibility of creating variants and more lethal variants of this virus is there also. And today there is a better understanding of that reality. Let's see, we see more vaccines going to African countries, but we are still very far of reaching the desired point of that. And why is that? Because one challenge is to have the vaccines in the countries, but then you have the all logistics to have the vaccines in the very remote areas so that it's accessible to every citizen in need. And this requires resources, this requires trained people to administer the vaccines, this requires also trained people to make assessment on the effectiveness of the vaccines, because vaccines are products like other ones. They are subject to temperature, the logistics of that is very complex indeed, and therefore philanthropy has a key role to play on that. First, to make sure that the vaccines are acceptable to countries which cannot access to them by commercial means. And secondly, to make sure that at the country level, vaccines are distributed in an equity manner within the country, because equity also is a country challenge too. And third element is to make sure that trained people to administer the vaccines in conjunction with other health programs are there. And fourth, to make sure that the research which is associated with the efficacy and effectiveness of this vaccine also is there. And therefore, and also to make sure that all the gains of vaccinating large populations are not lost, because it's very easy to lose if the element of sustainability is not there. So we have to look at this pandemic on one hand, but also we have to look at what is going to happen in the future, and also what is the level of our preparedness for other pandemics to happen. And therefore, in all these segments, these are challenging. Philanthropies are very much welcome indeed. So in short, that's what I can answer.
Thank you. I think in short, that is a very comprehensive answer that does call upon a very thoughtful approach of philanthropy to deal with that complexity. And maybe staying with that element of global solidarity, and back to you, Laurence. When we met in Vienna just a couple of months ago, in fact, we asked our participants ahead of the conference whether they were planning to do more international work in the years ahead. And more than half of the foundation and more than 60% of the participants said that they would, and they would do that for the exact reasons that were mentioned also by Dr. Simao. Now, meanwhile, we see that the countries that are more fragile continue to be hit the hardest by those different crises that we're meeting. And as the former chair also of the Agence Française de Développement, I'm sure that this is something that's very close to your heart. And how do you see those relationships between the more affluent countries and those living in more fragile situations?
I think, and if I was building on your understanding that we are all connected, and health, of course, is a wonderful, even sad example, you see that finally the impact of climate change produce exactly the same impact. When you look at the different conflicts that has happened in different regions, in particular in Africa, and you can see in Tigray and Sudan and Sahel, of course, but many other places as well, you see that the impact of climate change is the source of major displacement of population. And this displacement of population is an enormous source of instability and insecurity. Not only for Europe, even if we have to consider, because that's our neighbors, the countries who are really well linked to because of proximity. So we should take care about the way people can resist and be resilient against climate change. And it's a very difficult, of course, we may not know because, again, it's relatively new. Finally, we are talking about adaptation to climate change from many years. But at the same time, we have done little to understand, beyond the classical element of water management, for example. But the links with health are enormous. We see that. And the degradation of environment is producing all this connectivity between animal health and human health. So that's why I think I appreciated enormously what you said, Delphine, in the beginning. We have to think, and it's not easy for philanthropy sometimes, to think about the interconnectedness. That is a systemic problem we are facing. And we cannot have one solution that could do miracles. And I see in many of my colleagues, in particular the new people arriving to philanthropy, they would like to have a shortcut, to have one silver bullet that kills the problems. But it's not happening, you know. Even when we have a vaccine, as you say, we need a system and that's the same for climate action. And at the same time, there is an enormous demand or expectation about what philanthropy can do, in particular on climate, but many other issues. And you see governments saying, we don't have any more public money, so philanthropy could fill the gap. It's not possible. I think philanthropy's role is to think systemic, to support civil society, to advocate for solutions, to point where are the gaps, to pressure, like we have to do, no, during the COVID crisis, that you could not have vaccine nationalism. But then that is our job in a way, and of course we can mobilize resources to help organization on the ground, but philanthropy cannot take off the responsibility of governments and businesses and investors. So it's a systemic approach we should have. And just one last word, we will never have a climate ambitious agreement, even if, of course, is in a way somehow disarray because of the geopolitics. If the less developed countries didn't have a very strong voice in the final hours, we need the voice of the more affected to set the bar of climate justice. As well, we need the voice of the more affected by a pandemic to set the bar of the global treatment. And I hope on malaria we will do the same than for COVID, I hope.
Thank you. And thank you also for emphasizing that point on interconnectedness. And that interconnectedness is something that we see again with the war in Ukraine. And coming back to you, Leonardo, your home country, Mozambique, is in fact one of the African countries that is most exposed to the food and energy shocks from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So again, you see that interconnectedness happening at that level.
Well, it's happening, but unfortunately Mozambique is one of these countries which has been affected by several natural and man-made disasters. Yeah, for the last maybe 40 years or so. We went from conflict to the other, and therefore we have a deep understanding of what is happening in Ukraine firsthand. I'm myself a medical doctor by training, and I spent part of my life dealing with the victims of war. So I can tell you that it's not a pleasant experience. And therefore, I understand what is happening in Ukraine. But also, Mozambique has been affected by climate change. Every season, more than 100 cyclones are formed across the Indian Ocean. And some of them, they reach Mozambique, they reach Mauritius, they reach Madagascar, other coastal countries in Africa, with a devastating effect. The first one we had was in the year 2000, when everybody was celebrating the new millennium, hoping that, well, the future will be bright. Then came the worst floods we had in memory. The discussions those days was that these extreme events in the future will be more frequent and more violent. And this is happening. So the prediction was right. So this is happening. Every 2 or 3 years, we have floods, severe floods with cyclones, but also intertwined with periods of drought. So we're having it all. So the war in Ukraine is another disaster accruing on top of that happening, because part of the food stuff comes from this country, Russia and Ukraine, and also the prices of commodities like oil and gas, because they are together on that. So the impact of that in Africa is going to be assessed. But one thing is clear now. This will delay all the efforts Africa is making for its development. So there is a real, and this also shows more than anything else, that what happens 10,000 miles away, it affects also people on the ground. So that notion that we are living in one planet And therefore, we are bound together. It's crystal clear with what is happening in Ukraine. That's why we in Mozambique, given our experience of suffering with the conflicts, we said that the sooner a negotiated solution is found for Ukraine, the better for everybody. The better, yeah, I thank you.
Thank you. And again, it emphasizes how we're facing with a polycrisis that cannot be solved by one country or one sector alone, within which philanthropy really has a clear role to play. And maybe let me turn to Joe. Joe, you're here as the voice of youth, though we have many voices of youth in the room. And it was once said that youth is wasted on the young. Now, to be honest, I think it's not so easy to grow up and be a young person when you see climate change, when you see inequality on the rise. How is it affecting young people?
So the Youth Forum at the beginning of the pandemic did a survey of about 12,000 young people. And the surprise to me and shock, I thought climate would be the number one thing that everyone was talking about, but actually it was mental health, it was anxiety. And I think if you look at the sort of long term, we've got climate, we've got food issues, we've got all sorts of things. We look at the midterm, we've got misinformation and poverty and various other things. And we look at the short term, we have cost of living crisis. We have young people who go to cities because that's where all the jobs are, but they spend 70% of their income on rent because they can't afford stuff. And you create potentially a really scary situation that keeps me up at night, where young people are really disinvesting themselves in a rules-based, multilateral, democratic system. And that's pretty terrifying to me. And I think that we all, and to Lawrence's point, I couldn't agree more on interconnectivity. We all have a role to play here. But, and again, to the point of this conference, the time is now. We have a really big crisis coming. The French elections terrified me. Because if you look at the first round, the 18 to 35 cohort would have gone for Le Pen. If we look at the second round, the 25 to 35 age cohort would have gone for Le Pen. And one of the reasons for that is this incredible amount of anxiety because of all these crises, all are so big, almost untacklable. And I guess that's sort of one of the reasons why I'm here today is like, what can we all do about this? And this room has something to do very much. Governments have something to do. Mini democracy NGOs like us have something to do. And it's that point of interconnectedness. But if we don't solve this, my nervousness is that the young cohort coming through, and by that I mean sort of 25 to 35, are going to reject our democratic system. And if we want to solve climate, we want to solve inequality, we want to solve all these things, we can't do that if people don't believe in the system.
No, we can't do that if they disengage. And I think it's interconnectedness and intergenerational dialogue as well. And maybe going to Michael and taking a bit of a step back and looking at the bigger picture. Michael, yesterday, upon your way to Barcelona, you gave us a bit of a heads up on potentially a way forward with a tweet which said that human rights are the golden thread, linking efforts to tackle the great challenges we're discussing today. So maybe moving on to a bit of hope, maybe, Michael, that you would like to share with us.
As for the tweet, I would say that, wouldn't I, given the job I do. Look, I wanted to say I agree with the entire analysis here, and there's even elements that we could have emphasized more strongly. The issue of inequality that Joe touched on there is huge. By the way, you need to put a face on things like this. Inequality means nothing. It's got to be people. So for me, it's the Roma. In the EU alone, there's 6 million Roma living in the most deplorable conditions. It's the Roma child who was told to distance learn but didn't have a computer. I could go on all day. But let's put a face on issues like inequality, a face on poverty, and that will allow us to realize it's about human beings. And I guess that's where the tweet comes in. Did you notice right out here in the hallway, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is emblazoned on the wall? I was struck by that coming in. And the problem is that that's emblematic of how we treat human rights in our societies today. We give it high token value, but we don't use it as a roadmap to make the solid changes for our societies. And when I'm talking about human rights, I'm not just talking about civil or political rights, I'm also talking about socio-economic rights, the right to culture, to the enjoyment of your culture. The list goes on. Article 27 of the Universal Declaration out there, it's actually up on the wall, the right to culture. But we've allowed the systems to corrode. We've become very lazy. 70-something years after the whole thing was put in place, with a huge vision after the Second World War, it's almost as if we've stopped really being serious, really believing in it. And it's high time to wake up, because it's going to fall apart if we don't move fast. By the way, it's not just about what do we want to do there. Well, the first thing is we've got to save the institutions that deliver human rights for us. Yes, I'm very scared about what people who vote for populists could do in the future, but I'm also worried about the erosion of the institutions right now. We have too many countries where the courts are no longer free. We have too many countries that no longer invest in free, thriving media. Civil society is under pressure in so many different places. And that brings me back to philanthropists. I went on your website yesterday, and I loved that Philea locates itself not working with civil society, but embedded in civil society. And so here, my message to philanthropists today, whilst echoing everything that's already been said, is wake up to your need to offer mutual support to other members of civil society. NGOs here in the EU as well as elsewhere are under extreme pressure. Depending on the issue you work on, you can't operate at all. And so they're crying out for solidarity, for support, for acknowledgement, and for platforms. And I'll maybe stop with this. Another dimension of how we've allowed these institutions that deliver human rights to erode is that we've removed so many of the speaking and listening spaces where citizens can express a view, have it respectfully acknowledged, and even acted upon. Indeed, talking to young people, I don't know if Joe would agree with this, but I do structured dialogues with young people, 3 or 4 of them a year, and everywhere, most recently Paris 2 weeks ago, people are so angry that they have opinions, but there's nowhere to express the opinion. And even if it's expressed, there's nowhere to get the feedback from whoever the decision maker might be. And so that's another element of what we need to work on right now if we're to fix this system. Pope John Paul II called human rights modernity's greatest achievement, and we're on the edge of losing it.
Thank you, Michael. And that point of co-creation, of creating spaces where we can dialogue and discuss, I think it's one that is also very close to Laurence's heart, to make sure that the solutions also for climate are created together.
I was very happy to hear all and agree, because my hope, and that's for me the role of philanthropy. We are living a crisis in our democratic system. We know that. Look at US, just a terrible situation. But it happened in Europe too. And of course, I was as anxious as you of the French election to see that so many young people could agree with a vision of authoritarian regime and pro-Putin regime, like we know now it's a dictatorship that is coming in. And that because of the distrust in actual institutions. So I think philanthropy has to work and we can, because we have so many skills and talents to work on improve the democracy and that citizen voice. Putting, in a way, giving agency and empowering citizens, I think it's when you are anxious about anything, the climate, the cost of life, the response, the democratic response to anxiety is action. And action means a voice and having feedback. And I have had the privilege, which was for me as important as the job I did for Paris Agreement negotiation with government, was to chair the Citizen Assembly in France that worked for 1.5 years on the climate policy for France. And I saw miracles of very young, teenagers talking with elder people who never have a clue, and anybody had no clue on climate action. And they were, during this process, empowered and able to have the voice, a constructed argument. And I would say most of the time is because, I can say, politicians and decision makers don't respect the public most of the time. There is a sentiment of arrogance. We say people don't trust institutions. But look, sometimes, many times, the top distrust totally the public and distrust the citizens. They think they are not able, they are not expert, they don't know, and we should impose on them. This is at the core of the problem, in my view, and for the young people who has to, in a way, rebuild this element of adhesion for democracy, and in particular in our region for Europe as a democratic project, we need to give them the tools to express themselves, to have participative democracy. Really, philanthropy can do enormous things in that. That's not so much money to help citizens to organize and to make voice and to incentivize the mayors of the government to open their doors and to discuss whether budget or infrastructure or just general policy. The citizens are able to do that if we trust them. And that I think, for me, is a major failure. And I can tell the foundation has funded participative democracy, citizen assembly in UK, in Poland, in France, in Germany. And the result is always the same. You transform people to be people who are distrustful and anxious to people that are acting. And people who never heard about a particular important policy problem being ambassadors and actors in their region, in their families, and all over the place. And there is one famous example. We had a person who was a pensioner, never heard about environment. The only objective in life was to have a house and a car. And then now he works for trying to make ecocide a guilt at the European Court of Justice. So he has transformed himself totally. If that is the reason where we could revive democracy, and I think philanthropy has this role.
I see Joe nodding enthusiastically.
I am. So right, there's only two motive forces in the world: the fear of loss and sight of gain. So hope and fear, right? And that's my note. And I love hearing this because it's like we need to do more hope. We need to do more positive. I get nervous by like when I see just the endless kind of doom scrolling on either social media or output of climate's going to cause terrible stuff or humanitarian or food or da-da-da-da-da. And where are the spaces for this positivity to come? Like we had a really great experience actually with the Conference on the Future of Europe, which was exactly this massive, big process to have citizen voice. And whilst it was sort of a bit strange at times with ideas of moon bases and various other things, there was actually loads of really quality content whenever you actually spent a year and a bit talking with citizens as peers. And I think there's so much room to do much more of that. There's just in every project, let's make sure like a load of that project is about positivity as much as it is about flagging what the problem is. Like that's something I don't see built into structures. And then absolutely empowering that sort of civil society, civil voice and space for co-creation and listening is so important.
No, I think absolutely. Maybe going back to a point that you mentioned earlier, Michael, around culture. And I think it's definitely also something that we'll see throughout the program at our conference today, how culture can also be a vector for upholding human rights, a vector for social cohesion. Do you feel that as philanthropic organizations, we need to embed more of those cultural approaches, also to find that positivity and have that creativity together to imagine another future?
Sure. I'll get to culture in a second, but just first on this business of hope. We need hope. Without hope, there's no point. But the hope has to be evidence-based. It can't be a naive optimism. And so we got some great examples here on the panel right now of evidence-based for hope, things that have changed because of the investment. But we have to keep searching for those. It's a big part of what my agency does. It's constantly surveying Europe to see what works so that can then be tried somewhere else and be a vector for change in that form. But let's avoid, and I'm not suggesting anybody here is doing this, but let's avoid a kind of naive optimism. Hope requires evidence and it takes hard work to deliver. Conference on the Future of Europe, amazing ideas. Not one of them has been converted into action yet. Fine, it's very quick, it's very new, very recent. But the effort is now to deliver on those hope-filled images for the future. Now turning to culture. I was searching for, thinking about today, I was searching for a word to capture how central culture is and has to be for us. And it's like the air. It's that central. Without culture, we're asphyxiated. We are nothing. Culture is the vehicle for our personal identity, our social identity, for memory of where we came from, a vision towards the future. And the extraordinary thing is that in moments of crisis, it gets shoved to the side. Oh, we don't have time for luxuries like culture, as if somehow it's separate from who people are and how people can be alive. And so we actually, at a moment of crisis, we have to invest more and more and more in culture. Not some highbrow notion of it being about sponsoring tickets to the opera. Yes, of course, that's culture. But it's about the relationship of the horse to the Roma. That's culture, and it's absolutely central. And so when you put a Roma in a home without a stable, and therefore they don't stay in that home, what you've done there is you've marginalized their cultural identity and somehow demanded a homogenized response from them. So culture in its vast breadth has to be top priority for all of us at a moment like this. And within there, indeed, we'll be able to make a fantastic evidence-based progress to get us out of the mess we're in right now.
Thank you. So culture is important also in how we conceive those solutions. And maybe saying to your point, Michael, around evidence-based hope, and going back also to Leonardo, of course, evidence-based hope for the 50% of the population of African who are below 18 and who are looking at the future. How do we also help tap into that potential and make sure that we support African youth?
Well, in Africa, the problems of youth are equal, because today with the modern communications, the sentiments of the youth are equal. And one of the complaints is that institutions don't pay enough attention to them. Sometimes they play lip services. They just listen to them as a matter of expediency, not as paying attention, real attention to them, and not having with them meaningful dialogue. And therefore, the sentiment of frustration is growing there. And also, as it was mentioned here, the mistrust on institutions, because these institutions are not meaningful to us. And this is also associated with lack of jobs, because in the past, education was associated with a good job and the possibility of raising a family, of having a social and stable life. No more. Today, highly educated people, their parents invest a lot of their savings educating their children to find out that then they don't get job. So that sentiment of frustration also go into the families. And then it comes also the drug consumption, which is a growing concern. Mm-hmm. If you look at this closely, it's associated with the frustration. In the past, we used to think, well, this drug consumption is about some segments of the youth, belongs to families which can afford some money for their children to buy drugs, but it's spreading across all layers of society today. And associated with that is organized crime and terrorism also. So you see a lot of links associated with that. Mozambique, we are facing insurgency in northern part of the country. And you look at when these people give up or they are apprehended by our army, talk to them, yeah, they don't have any future. They don't have something to fight for, something positive to fight for. So that element of hope, which was referred to, it's lacking, and the lack of hope. And you do something, you have a program in your life. When it is not there, then the value of your life is almost nothing. And therefore, maybe, I don't know what can be done. I don't have, as you said rightly, a silver bullet for that. But it's true that we adults have more responsibility to discuss and to listen to them and to find out new ways to bring at least hope for them as a first step. Mm-hmm. And to bring them more trust in the institutions. Not only use the youth to vote for you when it comes for vote, but you see them as citizens of your country. So I think philanthropy have a unique situation because philanthropy, they are not subject to voting cycles. You are always the same throughout the year. Year after year, governments come and go, but philanthropies remain there. And therefore, they have a unique position to be element of continuity of actions which can be started. These things take time, yes, but it's necessary to start. And therefore, we are going to see. And philanthropy have this unique position, as I said, because they are not subject to elections. Elections, they are always disruptive. Sometimes we have a good understanding of one group in the government. These people start to do something, these people go in 5 years. Another group come, they don't have any clue on what to discuss. They don't take care of any commitments made before. So you have that a frustrating situation. You have to start all over again and again. But philanthropies are always there. They can talk both to governments. Listen, your government took these commitments. It doesn't matter if individually it was your team or not, but it was your government of there. And then to do it, okay, so it can be a connecting bridge, to make these two entities to continue a meaningful dialogue.
Thank you. And I think the longer-term vision of philanthropy and the ability to build bridges and to bring communities together and hold those who committed accountable, I think it's definitely one of the areas of interest also for the foundations with us today. I wanted to go back to Michael, who wants to respond also to this point.
Yeah, I was going to respond to one thing, but now I'm going to respond to another first, and that is, let's not push governments out of the equation entirely. Government plays an absolutely central, significant role, and we have to hold it to account. So the model of the relationship of philanthropy and government is a complementarity, not a substitution. But I think you had made the point earlier, but again, I felt it just useful to repeat it. Yeah, I want to come back to culture because I think I was a bit too simplistic in my response to your question, because of course one of the problems in our societies is the instrumentalization of culture. And let's be very careful, including in the philanthropy world, not to collude in that. You've got this nonsense of LGBT-free towns in Poland, well known. Why? Because it's against our culture. That's a bizarre, cruel instrumentalization. It's also nonsense. But let's make sure that in that or in the many other manifestations that we're not complicit. And another dimension of culture is investing in learning about other people's culture, spending time listening, understanding, and celebrating. Not just celebrating our own cultural identity, but that of everybody else. You have as one of the themes up there for us is united in diversity. Honoring culture is an important part of delivering on that diversity in our societies. And by the way, it has enormous social goods. It's not just about affirming people and who they are themselves, but it's for example, in celebrating Jewish culture, working against anti-Semitism and making a contribution towards ensuring we never again see anything like the horrors of the Holocaust. So forgive me for coming back, it's more nuanced than I think I gave the impression of in my first response. Philanthropy creates spaces to do this mutual listening and learning. It's highly important.
Thank you. Creating spaces. And I think we're unfortunately drawing towards the end of this panel. I think we could stay on this stage for a couple more hours with the speakers we have. But I'd like to invite you to maybe finish one sentence before you go off. And the title of our conference is The Time Is Now. And I'd like you to share the time is now too. I give you 30 seconds to think, but I'm sure you'll have some good responses. And whoever wants to start, please go ahead. The time is now too.
To move on.
Okay. Michael?
The time is now to deliver whereby everyone is free and equal in dignity and in rights. That's Article 1 of the Universal Declaration.
Thank you. Joe?
Can't beat that quote. The time is now to rebuild the faith in democracy and in our institutions by building with hope.
Thank you. Laurence?
I think the time is now for just doing that because we have to defend democracy as a viable way of living together. And there is a cultural battle going on in Ukraine, in my view. And our Ukrainian colleagues are telling that, which is a cultural war. And the second element that I think is human security is a way to connect all our needs and to feel that people has to be secure. And they have not to be secure on the military point of view, but we have to understand the human security in all dimensions. And I think that's the job, no, for philanthropy. It's the job to build infrastructure, to feel people secure. And if I said to transform the anger, because you feel the anger in societies, frustration, into action and positive action.
Thank you. And I think purpose is one of the best antidepressants there are. So I think you've given us a very clear clue on what to do for the next couple of days. And I'd like to thank you wholeheartedly for being with us today. Thank you.
Leonor Art for Change, idea, toma 3.
Desde que tengo uso de razón, he querido siempre estar rodeada de arte. Estoy convencida que la danza me encontró a mí para enseñarme el significado de la libertad. En esta ocasión he querido hacer un proyecto con un colectivo de mujeres en situación de vulnerabilidad. He querido acercarme a otras personas para bailar con ellas y compartir, desde un lenguaje que no tiene papeles, no necesita propiedades ni pasaporte. Art for Change es una oportunidad para tener todas estas experiencias, para seguir reflexionando sobre mi práctica y seguir avanzando en lo que significa el arte como cambio social. Y de lo que estoy convencida es que con crisis o sin crisis, el arte, la danza, es la mejor medicina para el mundo.
sueño viniste, y a mí parecía que tu suave brazo parecía que me abrazabas, que sufrimos del amor y el desvelo. Parecía que soda almohada me sirvió.
Thank you so much to the artist. I must admit it's a little bit intimidating to stand on stage after such a performance. But here we are, and I'd like to give you a couple of minutes to awaken from this really compelling illustration of how art can appeal to us as human beings, how art can tell a story, how art can also be part of that narrative that we talked about earlier around building hope and looking into a different future. And meanwhile, I think they will kindly put on a couple of chairs for us. And with that, I'd like you to invite you to prepare our minds for another conversation that we will be having. It's a conversation that we were not planning to have when we started developing the program for this conference 6 months ago. And it's a conference that, in fact, a conversation that, in fact, none of us was hoping to have, because it is a conversation about the war in Ukraine. And according to the Uppsala Conflict Data Program, there are in the world today 56 violent state-based conflicts. Ethiopia, Yemen, Nigeria, Afghanistan, just to name a few. Each and every one of these conflicts comes at a very high cost of human suffering. And each and every one of these conflicts really requires our attention and concern. But the war in Ukraine brought things very close to home for many of us. And it is a conflict that really illustrated how it can escalate very quickly to have global consequences. And we've talked about that with Dr. Simao and the other speakers in the first panel. So let me, with this, welcome our two speakers from Ukraine, Eugenia Mazurenko from the Zagori Foundation and Ina Pidlucka from the International Renaissance Foundation. Please join us on stage. Thank you so much, Eugenia, and thank you, Ina, for coming here. When we were preparing for this conversation, we talked a bit about how Russian regime's war on Ukraine really is an imminent threat to democratic values and to the international world order, and about how at global level it really endangers safety, security, and the well-being of hundreds of millions of people. The humanitarian crisis caused by the war in Ukraine, the looming global food crisis, the migration crisis, and the energy challenges that are faced by the world call for a comprehensive and global action. So I'm happy that you were able to join us, both of you. And I'd like to start by asking you how you're doing. How are you, Ina?
I always hate saying I'm fine, because it's not fine, of course. So it's day 96 of the war in Ukraine. The totally unjustified, never war can be ever justified, but the one which Putin's Russia started on Ukraine, and which is now challenging the whole world, the world order as we know it, is really something which is shaping all the minds. I mean, not just in Ukraine, but everywhere. So I've been thinking of my messenger, which is getting crazy with information about more people I know being in danger. Some people killed, some are targeted. So it's anger and devastation, and feeling determined that I'll do whatever it takes to help the country and the people to win this war. But there's also the feeling of pride for amazing people who have been not just fighting, but surviving, contributing, saving others, doing whatever is within their power, showing a lot of resilience at their local communities, taking care of those who are the most at risk, taking care of those who are the most at need. And we'll talk more about the contribution from the civil society. It's very dear to me because I am a civil society person, I've always been. But now, as I'm looking at my country, it's a tremendous demonstration of resilience, unity, and mutual support, which gives us a lot of hope. I heard wonderful words earlier today at this panel, and they were about evidence-based hope. Really, this is something of which we are seeing a lot. And, well, to come here, what used to be a 3-hour little flight from Kiev to Barcelona, this time it was something like 30 plus, and I had first to take a train from Kiev to Lviv, Western Ukraine, and then from Lviv to Poland, because the Warsaw, well, that's the closest where we can actually take a flight. So I was on a bus with some 50 women from Ukraine who were fleeing the war. Most of them were from eastern and southern Ukraine. Most of them didn't have a home anymore. And it was like the whole crisis in a snapshot. So we were sitting there over the night because it took a lot of time to cross the border. And I was hearing the conversations over this bus. And 2 elder women were speaking about the garden they left and the orchard they had, and they had the cherry trees, and they were saying that these cherry trees were the ones which brought them a lot of local income because they were selling the cherries from the market in their community and in local town, and they were wondering who will be picking those cherries, and will the town actually survive? And they were not sure, because we know now the town will probably not survive, because it's right now as we are speaking, it's being shelled and the missiles are landing on it. So there were 2 younger women, they were speaking about, we might actually want to go and work somewhere in Western Europe. Like Italy would be great, Spain would be great, Germany would be great, Poland would be great. But we really didn't want it to do right now and this way. So the choice was taken from them, and they really felt that they were being deprived of the right to choose what kind of life they're going to have, where their children will be growing. And people felt quite bitter about this. So there were a couple of small boys who were playing outside of the bus, and they were playing territorial defense. There's a lot of territorial defense in Ukraine now because people mobilized to protect their houses, to protect their villages and towns. Especially in the first days of the war, when it was far from certain that Ukraine would survive, that would stand. It was really a huge surprise which mobilized a lot of support, and I think which for which we will be forever grateful, is the spirit of solidarity and support worldwide, and how the people saw Ukraine's fight as their own fight, because Ukraine was fighting for values, the values of, like as an open society person, I would say they are fighting for values of democracy. They probably will not formulate it specifically in these words, but they were fighting for their freedom. They were fighting for their choice, for their home, and that did get tremendous support of people across the democratic world, which influenced their governments, which pushed their governments to act. And we are, as I said, we're forever grateful. It's not over, unfortunately, yet. But this solidarity gives us a lot of hope, and this is a great opportunity for me to join you here today, and I am humble and grateful for a chance to think together of how we as people from the philanthropy world could contribute to transforming the dreams and hope into the resilience and recovery and strength and whatever that takes. It was a little bit of a long answer to the question how I'm doing. Just wanted to share. I still struggle not to cry after this all wonderful presentation and the dance we saw. And thank you so much. Really, it means a lot to us.
Ina, I think we are humble and really impressed that you came here and that you took this 30-hour journey to get to Barcelona, because we were talking about this earlier. It is about people, it's about lives of individuals. And Eugenia, I also wanted to turn to you. I wanted to see how you're doing. Also taking into account that we have the youngest participant to this conference ever. As in a war, you don't leave your 4-year-old daughter in the country you are leaving. So Eugenia came over with her daughter, and I wanted to see how you and how your daughter have been doing over the past month.
Hello to everybody, and thank you for this performance, because it's made me feel that what I'm feeling today, and it's quite hard, and I expect that it would be hard speaking after Ina. I am personally from Bucha, and you might heard about Bucha massacre. My house was between Bucha and Hostomel, and with my daughter we spent days in a basement, and we saw how the Antonov airport and the biggest plane, Mria, was damaged. So we saw it from our window, and when my husband said, Zhenya, it's a time to go, I remember how I was paralyzed. I said, no, this is my house, this is my home, I will not go. And I'm currently in Ukraine. I have opportunity to leave this country, to go even to US, because I have relatives, friends, and everybody wants to support me. But this is my personal statement. I want to be at home. I don't want to be a refugee. I want to be a fighter, and I recognize myself as a fighter, even on an international, global level. I know that I am representative on NGO sector, and I want our voice to be heard. And we have the picture, if you can show it to everybody. This is a rooster, and maybe another picture with the shelves, yes. This is house in Borodyanka. It's quite 10 kilometers from my house, and it was destroyed. And you see these kitchen shelves and this rooster on it. And this is like symbol of our resilience, when everything could be destroyed, but this rooster, he is from porcelain, and he is not damaged. So this symbol I brought with us, and I want to present it. And yesterday I also buy this bag, and then at the hotel I just read it, good things are coming. So this will be my statement, that good things for Ukraine are coming. So this rooster is here, and I want to present for Philea. Yes. Thank you. The back I will say for myself. And you might see my daughter here. She is 4 years old. The kindergartens in Ukraine are closed, and many of my friends, my neighbors who are women, they forced to leave their jobs and to do invisible work. So my child is with me, and even in the current circumstance, I could not leave my child, because if it be some attack in Ivano-Frankivsk, where I'm right now, my husband will not allow to cross the border because of the military law in Ukraine. So men are prohibited to cross the border. So that is why she's here. Yeah.
Thank you, Eugenia, Ina. Thank you so much for sharing with us and for telling us that human story and for bringing that beautiful rooster. I think, to me, this rooster will symbolize the strength that you have as individuals and as people in telling your story and being part of this conversation with us. And let us maybe stay with that concept of resilience a little bit. It's something that has been talked about a lot. And I'd like to maybe listen to you and hear a bit about how civil society has been responding to the tragedy and the atrocities that you're seeing in your country, and how the philanthropic sector is also evolving and changing in terms of its landscape in the country.
Let me start, yeah?
Okay. Yes, please.
I come from the International Renaissance Foundation. It's part of the Open Society Foundations network established by George Soros for 32 years ago. So we are in Ukraine, we keep operating. We actually never stopped and never thought we would want to move, because for us moving would be abandoning what we have been working for 32 years and what we are determined to continue. We are not the only ones. We are a civil society donor, so we do support other civil society initiatives, of which there are plenty. They can be civil society partners and established institutions which have been with us for so many years. And when we were calling them the first couple of weeks, we then spoke in our donor circles, we were having the conversations with the grantees, but basically we were asking one question: are you alive? Are you safe? Where are you? Is there anything we as a donor could do to support you? How would you want to reorganize the grants which you already have, so that you would be able to protect your teams, to stay resilient, stay operational, stay with your communities, or outside of your communities geographically, but you would still be able to carry on. And this has been a dominating emotion around the civil society sector, but also in the philanthropic sector, so that first and foremost, we would want to support the people, because people are at the core of everything we are doing. And the people have been amazing. It's not just someone coming from the outside and bringing the much needed resources, of which, of course, there are plenty, and civil society would not be able to survive only on domestic resources. There's been an unprecedented international support and solidarity, and it can be counted in terms of money, and we are talking about billions. But what's more important is this sense of resilience, sense of togetherness, sense of being able to reach out to those who need you most and carry on. So I know people who have been working on 14-hour days for months, and I know this needs to somehow be revisited, because we don't want the whole philanthropic sector being out of this active engagement, because people just burn out, people would just want to move on. But this resilience builds on several things. One of them is, of course, understanding of why we are doing this and what we are fighting for. And this is, as I said, that's for the values, that's for the right to define the future, that's for the well, it may sound pathetic, but it is for a lasting peace in the world, of which Ukraine is at the forefront, because Putin will not stop in Ukraine. We know this, so could he see in the news how it's all happening. And the regime which feeds on violence, the regime which feeds on murder and rape and repression, just would not stop before or until it is stopped. That gives a lot of resilience, because Ukrainians know they don't have a lot of choice except then to win this war. The second source of the resilience is the future, of course, the plans of how the recovery will be happening. Ukrainians are very good at making plans. Some of those plans before somehow didn't go far, I have to say, but at this point, we see that there's so much more commitment to moving from planning and dreaming into acting and contributing to making sure that this action is there. And the third part of this resilience is indeed solidarity. That includes international solidarity. And again, it's far beyond resources. It's the solidarity of welcome. And it's the solidarity of creative welcome, not just giving the home to people who had to flee the war. It's also solidarity of engaging them in partnerships and collaborations, in new initiatives, many of which will then come back to Ukraine and contribute to this process of recovery, of which the civil society and philanthropy need to be a key part, because there's no other way in which we move from just building more quickly, even building well, into something which really has the people at the center and which has the people as both the goal and the means and the driving forces of this process. This is where resilient attitudes build on. And about the rooster, you know, it's not just it's fragile and it's porcelain. For me, it's also something which is humble, which is very ordinary. You would see it in a house of older people. It's not necessarily very beautiful, but it does have the wonderful feeling about it. It's authentic. A lot of Ukrainian resilience is authentic. It comes from the people's hearts, it comes of self-dependence, self-reliance, and mutual reliance, and that's really precious.
Thank you. And in terms of that authentic resilience, Eugenia, I remember you and I had a conversation, I think it was at the end of February, and to be honest, I think we were all completely in shock of what was happening to your country. And in the conversation, you told me, well, we need to start thinking about what we're going to do after the war. And that was your mindset from the beginning. How do we recover from this? How do we rebuild our country in a way that is, as we said from the beginning, greener, more inclusive and better? And you've been driven by that very much also from the beginning, right?
As I told you, I'm from Bucha, and this is deoccupied territory already. And continue speaking about civil society. So I can see it within my neighbors. So we are not waiting for the government support. Our residential complex, we have walls, but the missiles landed to our roofs. So we created a fund, our domestic fund, and we, within our neighbors, we just made donations and we tried to rebuild it by ourselves. So we try to clean our forest, we try to do demining, so we try to hire people who can do it. And I would say, as a representative of NGO sector, I would say we're also in shock, because how, like, everybody is involved. And I was thinking about it, because my colleagues told me that we have researchers from Harvard that came to Ukraine and want to assess what is the phenomenon of this civil society unity today. And I was thinking that we have roots from USSR, because in USSR it was very difficult to get something, and you should build the connections, and through this connection you will get everything you want. So even this time, almost in every family, within your relatives, somebody is on a battlefront. And if you want to equip your relative, you just buy West, Hamlet, and every equipment, and you just made a post in Instagram and Facebook and see, like, guys, this is my relative. Because people trust people, and in, like, a day or 2 hours, you can raise money even to buy a car. So, and our family, personally, we bought at least 10 cars because people trust us, and we do reports of it. I also want to add that we have occupied territories, and we don't see international humanitarian support there, and also locals are not doing the work there. But the governmental post service is there. And my colleague Anya, she's communication head in the Gori Foundation. She's from Donetsk, and she has many relatives in Konstantinivka, in this region. And relatives just started to write her, Anya, we need food, we need, there is no electricity, so we need to somehow prepare dishes. And Anya just made a post that, guys, I'm going to help my relatives. And I know that they closed more than 182, I would say, orders. Excuse me for this word, but it's like orders. And I see that sometimes we, not sometimes, every day, we just can make somebody's life better, but our own work. And it made me clear that in Ukraine, everybody became to understand its own role, even in business. So in business, we didn't have questions, what I can do. We have questions, how I can do more and how I can do better. So, and everybody, as I told you, knows its roles. And we one unity today, and this is historical moment when 91% support our president. So even I didn't vote for this president, but I really support what he is doing today. And it's important to understand that it's also one of the resilient things in Ukraine, that we have existing president, we have our government, we have all structures that are working, we have a school system, so our children, they work remotely, but they continue to finish its educational year. And I think it's a point of resilience also. And I also agree with Ina that the human being became in the center, and if we keep it, we will rebuild our country, because the life is we start to think not about indicators, but we start to think about life. Even evacuation process, we was thinking about how many people we could brought to these territories to another. And even today, I'm not thinking about my home. So I realized that someday I will back to my home. But just think about it. I can go back to my home, to their occupied territories. But I personally and all Ukrainians could not back to the 23 of February. So the life would be not the same, but I really, truly believe that we are fighters, and we believe me, we don't want to have this humanitarian problem. We have our personal dignity. We don't want to be a problem for the Europe, but we could not fight lonely with this Russia culture, because this is not the Putin war. This is the more than 87% of Russians support Putin activities in Ukraine. And we need global support.
Thank you, Jim. Maybe I wanted to turn back to Ina, a little bit to deepen that point also on humanitarian aid. Of course, we've seen mass mobilization to support where possible, but I wanted to see what your lessons learned were in terms of smart humanitarian aid, because humanitarian aid can be disruptive also in the country. How do you, in those circumstances, create humanitarian aid that actually helps build that social cohesion that is so important?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dupin. This is a great question and a great way to frame it. So, humanitarian aid, unfortunately, is not something new. The world has been in dire need of humanitarian aid, and there have been huge and massive flows of that. And in Ukraine, I mean, the war didn't start on the 24th of February, as we know, so the war has been on the Ukrainian territory when Russia first annexed the Crimea in 2014 and attacked the eastern side of the Donetsk and Lugansk region, which had been occupied as well for 8 years. And actually there was a lot of effort already, and there was a lot of need for the humanitarian aid. And something which gets me wonder, every time we are into a new crisis, we are sort of reinventing what humanitarian aid is. Why is it that it's too little? Why is it that it's not fast enough? Why is it that sometimes it's just not working? I mean, Ukrainians are paying such a heavy price for learning how to rethink humanitarian aid that I really want to speak about these lessons, and something we already know. So one of them, and you mentioned smart aid. Indeed, it needs to be smart. It needs not just to be about the basic necessities, about the emergency, food and shelter, which are, of course, absolutely needed, because when people are having bombs falling on their heads and they have nothing to feed their children with, of course, they will not be thinking about recovery. But still, at some point, what we've found out is a lot of Ukrainians, and when I say a lot, I mean 14 out of 40 million people who have been displaced from their homes. 6.6 million found their new homes or found temporary protection, for which, again, I think it's been amazing that it's been enacted by the European Union. But they found this temporary protection out of Ukraine. That means over 8 million is still there. And they do need emergency protection and emergency aid, but they also need others. They need jobs, they need access to essential social services, to the healthcare system, to the education system. I fully agree with Zhenya. She mentioned the working institutions. This is another very unusual, I would say, in the time of war or in the time of a deadly conflict, when institutions continue to function, which basically means a lot of this smart aid needs to support those institutions and enable them and match their efforts with other efforts on the ground, so that to see how, in addition to bare emergencies, there's something which would then move us forward towards more enabling environment, more opportunities for people who have been displaced, but they are reopening their businesses, they are restarting their work, they are like IDPs from Eastern Ukraine are organizing schools in Western Ukraine for their own children, but also for the local children. The businesses which had to relocate with their own employees, but they also create new jobs. Some communities in Western Ukraine have welcomed almost as many people as initially lived in their communities. Of course, that's a huge, how would I say, the huge additional challenge for the local resources, but they are starting to think, and here it's another very important thing which you have mentioned, which is about social cohesion. They are starting to think of IDPs and their new villagers, new people in their towns as a huge and precious social capital. So knowing how the aid could go into supporting this cohesion and making sure that people who come to new communities are not a burden, are not a competition for the scarce resources, but actually are a huge asset, and how they find and reinvent ways in which they could contribute and give back and create new value. This is something immensely important, and this is something I really hope we will be able to discuss more as philanthropists, because philanthropies are uniquely positioned in adding value and creating these new ideas and approaches to how we deliver humanitarian aid. Just a couple of examples to give you the scale. So EBRD says that Ukraine will be 30% down. They say negative growth. I love the words negative growth this year. But if the aid is used wisely and if the recovery is organized with all the huge resources which are being committed, and when the resources arrive, the next year it will be able to catch up 20 to 25% back. But the condition is really investment in human capital, wise, creative, proactive, strategic, if you would like to say. Humanitarian aid, I think this emergency nature of it doesn't leave us a lot of space and time to think about strategy, but the philanthropists do have this benefit of being strategic, sitting back, taking a deep breath, organizing, coordinating, information sharing, exchanging tools, welcoming each other to fora and platforms. And again, huge compliments to this distinguished community for organizing so many impressive formats which already work. Let me stop here. I can talk more about that, but I'm sorry to take too much time.
Thank you so much, Ina. And what I also hear from this is that evidence-based hope that is also built around resilience and solidarity. And that's what we're really seeing in action. Eugenia, did you want to maybe share your final thoughts before we unfortunately have to close this conversation as well?
I just want to add about what Ina said about platform of communication. When the I would say not war, but the full-scale war started on the 24th, and in every car, you understood that you have the people in every car. They had the same feeling as you had, and people who trying to cross the border, they just needed food, and civil society provided it. And locals, I mean local organizations, they started to react immediately. They adapted very quickly, and they started to provide services. Somebody started to evacuate their beneficiaries, somebody started to provide humanitarian aid, and even Red Cross started to work after 12 days. And I'm quite afraid that many humanitarian organizations are coming to Ukraine. And this is great, but I am afraid of the lack of communication, that we need to create this platform. Maybe it would be not some physical, because locals, they are like strategic people. They don't think about communication. They don't think that they should be known on a global level. And I see how many small unities organized. We have quite many homeless animals, and other new organizations started to do work in Bucha, Gostomel. They try to find those animals, and I understand that it's great today, but to have the sustainability of their work with at least animal shelters and provide food, and then somehow to distribute those animals within Ukrainians or maybe abroad, they need to grow as a structure. And this is like small case, but I see that how many organizations they really need to be supported, but by their institutional work. For example, we didn't mention that the focus of philanthropy in Ukraine was shifted. So even the Gori Foundation, it's a family foundation, and our owners offer, our founders, they are owners of pharmaceutical company. And I see that at the beginning of the year, we planned to have another activities, but even today, this family, they are reacted on future problems. So they decided to provide a special pills for Ukrainian hospitals, and it's free of charge. It's a pills, if I hope it will be not in Ukraine, but if we have nuclear attack, you need to have these pills, iodium, yes? Iodium?
Yeah,
And then your theory starts to work. And this is, you see how focus shifted. So, and they could not, it's great that they have opportunity to react on it. And as I told you, everybody wants to defend our country. And before the war, the main philanthropist in Ukraine was ordinary Ukrainian person. And this Ukrainian person wants to donate to buy some best hamlets, or to provide food to the neighbors, or to do some reconstruction, but to continue the work of angiosphere, I mean, maybe some paleotic topics. So who will continue to support these organizations? And my friends from abroad, they are very surprised that we are still operating country, even our business, NGO sector, our government. And I hope that it will show that after victory, when we get victory, or when it will be the stage of rebuilding of our country, we will be a country for investors, because the global society will see that we could operate in any circumstances of our lives.
Thank you so much, Eugenia and Ina. And with this, let me now turn to the last speaker of our opening plenary this morning, the Director General of the International Organization for Migration, Antonio Vitorino, has been with us and has been listening to the conversation. And we're delighted that he's also going to be sharing his thoughts as a response to your inputs.
Good afternoon to all of you. I would start by thanking Delphine for inviting me to speak here today. From my perspective, private philanthropy and the critical support that the private philanthropy associations provide to civil society underpins the work that IOM does in the field around the world. We rely on the knowledge, on the networks, and on the expertise that local partners offer wherever we work. Whether we engage in social inclusion, counter-trafficking, advocacy, or the many other issues on which we collaborate, I think that each time more and more civil society engagement is critical. How you, as foundations, choose to engage and invest influences the success of all actors, including international organizations that seek to improve the lives of people on the move. And I must say that I am deeply moved and touched by the testimonies that we have just heard. And that's a clear sign that the international community needs to work with all the key actors, the NGOs, the private sector, foundations, philanthropic organizations, to ensure that all those affected by war in Ukraine and within and outside the country receive the support they need. The impacts on the people of Ukraine and the long-term challenges that the conflict presents to the country and to the region need to be taken at the same time and in parallel. And as it has already been said by Ina and by Eugenia, we have seen extraordinary and fast-paced displacement of people within Ukraine, but also across Europe. But we have equally seen a strong and very positive reaction from governments, communities, civil society, and citizens across the region, mobilizing to help those who have fled the conflict, often with only what they can carry. I will never forget Irina, a Ukrainian woman that met me at the border with Poland and showed me her carry-on suitcase saying, I'm 48 years old, that's everything that is left from my life is here in this suitcase. We bear witness daily to stories of strength, resilience, and kindness, both within Ukrainian communities, but also across Europe, where refugees, fortunately, have been welcomed. As it has already been said by Ina, since February 24th, more than 6.6 million Ukrainians have crossed the borders out of Ukraine. Less visible are the 243,000 third country nationals that were in Ukraine and have also crossed the border, uncertain of their future, and some of whom, unfortunately, have experienced targeted discrimination and even harassment. Within Ukraine, IOM's own data from the 3rd of May show over 8 million people, 18% of the country's population, are internally displaced, including those displaced since 2014 because of the takeover of Crimea and parts of the Donbas region. These devastating numbers hide further complexity. Around 2.1 million Ukrainians have also re-entered Ukraine. Some are moving back and forth, managing lives and families split across several locations, while others are returning home as the conflict now has moved to the east. Within Ukraine, the pattern of internal displacement is constantly shifting. We estimate that over 2.7 million have returned home, though a significant number of those, both displaced internally and those who return from abroad, report that they do not feel safe and they may move again in search of shelter and protection. And those who return to the regions of origin sometimes find their houses totally destroyed and they are in need of food, of water, of electricity, of shelter. We also cannot talk about this crisis without recognizing the particular vulnerabilities of those displaced, especially children, women and girls, the elderly, and people with disabilities. Women and girls are at increased risk of sexual and gender-based violence, as well as trafficking. We are working closely with civil society, including women's organizations, to bolster protection, as well as strengthen systems, including some spontaneous systems of community support that were mentioned a few minutes ago, to reduce the risk of trafficking and of abuse. Therefore, the decision of the European Union member states to offer temporary protection status to all those who have crossed the border was indeed a historic expression of solidarity. And as I speak to you today, more than 2.8 million Ukrainians have already registered under temporary protection or similar national schemes across the entire European Union. But let me be clear, temporary protection is just the first step. The real work begins now and will require a whole of society effort. First, to ensure that refugees and third country nationals fleeing the country can find housing for their families, access to key services, particularly health and education, acquire the local language of the countries where they are now, and join labor markets, whether it is for a few months or for years. From our contacts, we know that the vast majority wants to return to Ukraine as the conditions are met. And second, to invest in rebuilding a country that has been and is still being devastated by a conflict. For many who wish to return, there is little to return to. Towns and cities, all communities have been destroyed. Within Ukraine and in neighboring countries, IOM has so far focused on meeting the immediate humanitarian needs. And therefore, we have a network of 13 warehouses that operate inside Ukraine, and therefore we can reach almost all regions of the country. And this is thanks to the 30 implementing partners that we have, working effectively with the local governments, NGOs, and civil society partners. But we must now start to look to the longer term needs, and to the challenge of recovering and reconstructing the country and bringing together all those who seek to rebuild Ukraine, from citizens to international organizations. We know this will not be easy. And the support of philanthropy has never been more important in this endeavor. And the overarching commitment we have made to ensure that migration and mobility is managed in a safe, orderly, and regular way that upholds the rights of migrants worldwide, irrespective of their legal status. Indeed, the war in Ukraine has created a situation of acute, large-scale distress. It is, sadly, far from the only one in the world. We remain deeply concerned about the situation in Afghanistan, for instance, but also in Yemen, in Ethiopia, in Venezuela, and across Central Europe, to name but a few. But it is also causing global ripple effects, the extent of which, I'm afraid, we do not yet comprehend fully. The entire world is under pressure. Global economic growth, already projected to slow due to the pandemic, will further slow because of the conflict in Ukraine. Food and fuel prices increases will hit already marginalized populations, including migrants, in low income, in wealthy countries alike. This will be compounded by higher inflation, particularly in emerging and developing economies. Government budgets, already stretched by the pandemic, will have to stretch still further. Low-income countries will not have the fiscal capacity to manage impacts of changing prices, and we must expect social distress and social unrest. In regions where repeated drought has already created high levels of food instability and repeated disaster has reduced community resilience, these economic shifts are of gravest concerns. Climate and environmental change continue to affect the lives and livelihoods of millions around the world. In 2021, just 22.3 million were displaced by weather-related disasters, including floods, cyclones, droughts, and extreme temperatures, a trend that is set to increase in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, we need you. We need you to help bridge the increasing gap between the needs we see and the capacity we have to respond. We need you to be the oil in the machinery of partnership, bringing actors together in pursuit of common goals, from social inclusion of Ukrainians to the mitigation of social, economic, climate, and pandemic-related impacts, particularly at the local level. And we need you to reinforce the voice and the participation of civil society in critical local, national, and multinational discussions for many millions in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world. Our cooperation and partnerships are the last frontier of hope for a better and more human future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonio, for indeed reminding us of that responsibility that we have to use the power of philanthropy for good. Thank you so much, Eugenia. Thank you, Ina, for being with us. We will treasure this rooster as a symbol of your resilience and as a recollection of why we are here and why the time is now for philanthropy to be united. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if I can now invite you to join us for lunch on the top floor of the building. And we'll have more opportunities to speak with Ina and Eugenia there. Thank you. Thank you.